Welcome to SendLayer, reliable email deliverability made easy. In this video, we're going to talk about how email authentication works. There are a few different authentication methods out there, so if you've ever run into them and wondered, what is this and how does this work? Then sit tight and let's talk about it. First things first, you might be wondering, what is email authentication in general? Email authentication is a crucial process that ensures your messages are delivered reliably and don't end up in a user's spam folder. You might think that spam isn't such a huge problem, but it really is. Over half of all emails that are sent out are actually spam messages, which can be a huge problem if you're trying to keep your inbox clear for important messages. And this is where email authentication comes in. There are different methods of email authentication, but the most widely adopted are SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. These are acronyms for the email security protocols that make sure that emails are being sent from the domain name they claim to be sent from, thus reducing the amount of spam that ends up in your inbox. They all work in a different way and have their own set of rules, but they all determine whether or not an email is genuine. The main difference, however, is that SPF and DKIM are authentication protocols, and DMARC is actually a set of instructions that tells the receiving email server what it should do if authentication via SPF or DKIM fails. With that being said, let's talk about how each of these methods work. Let's start with SPF, and no, I'm not talking about sunscreen. SPF stands for Sender Policy Framework. This lists all of the IP addresses of both servers and apps that are authorized to send out emails on your behalf. When a customer's email provider receives an email, they can check the SPF records to make sure the message came from an authorized server. And while the email server sometimes won't outright block emails that fail authentication entirely, they'll instead mark the messages as spam. It's important to set up an SPF record regardless of whether or not you send emails from your domain. Setting up an SPF record will protect you from domain spoofing, which is when other parties fake a website name or email domain to fool others. If you fall victim to this, these malicious parties could send out all kinds of emails to users claiming to be you. Next, let's talk about the second authentication method, DKIM. DKIM stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail. This method uses public key cryptography, which is a method of encrypting data with two different keys, one public, one private. The DKIM record itself stores the public key, which is visible to any email server that requests it. When the email is sent, the message header is signed with the private key by the domain owner. And when the receiving email server gets the message will only pass the authentication test if it has been signed with the private key. If it doesn't pass, then the message is either blocked or marked as spam. Using this method ensures that the contents of the email isn't compromised from the time it leaves your server and is received by the user's email server. Finally, let's talk about DMARC. DMARC stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication Report and Conformance. This is a policy that tells incoming mail servers what to do if a message passes or fails SPF and DKIM. Email servers will either quarantine, reject, or still deliver these messages. If the email doesn't pass DMARC authentication, then a report can also be generated with information about these types of messages. You can adjust your DMARC policies based on the information in these reports to make sure that it's working properly and isn't being too aggressive with marking messages as spam. These reports can also alert you and your email provider about someone using your domain to send out spam. While SPF and DKIM aren't required for DMARC, it's highly recommended because they both work in different ways. SPF confirms that an email came from where it says it's coming from, and the DKIM signature confirms that the message hasn't been altered in any way before it reached its destination. If you want to set up these types of records for your domain, the way you go about it will vary depending on the services you're using to host your site. This can sometimes be time-consuming and confusing, especially if you're doing this for the first time. While you can ask your web hosting service for advice on how to generate these records, an easier method would be to use a platform like SendLayer. SendLayer will automatically generate SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records for you to ensure all emails sent from your site are fully authenticated. All you need to do is copy and paste these records into your host's DNS settings. Once you've added your records to your host DNS settings, You can send yourself a test email from your site to make sure such messages are being authenticated. The results of this authentication process will be added to the header of an email. This isn't normally displayed, but if an email provider has an option like Show Original or Show Header for each message, you can click on this to see the results. But the easiest way to tell is if the message arrived in your inbox at all. Messages that fail will usually end up in spam or are flat out rejected. And that's all there is to it. You now know how email authentication works and how to use SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records. If you have any questions or concerns, be sure to visit SendLayer.com and check out our documentation page, which has tons of different written resources and step-by-step guides to help you even further. If you need any extra help, you can always visit our contact page and reach out to our support team.